On today's edition of Locked On Eagles, we're going to hear from the listeners, a mailbag edition of the show. Some awesome questions about the Eagles' path to the Super Bowl, some draft talk, what they're going to do with safety right now with Chauncey Gardner-Johnson and Blankenship out, all that and more, plus LOE3 presented by BetOnline on this Friday edition of Locked On Eagles.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day, Monday through Friday. I'm Louie DiBiase, your host for the day. Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen every day. As I mentioned, you can follow us on the show, all podcast platforms, on YouTube as well, and on Twitter. Make sure you hit us up at Locked On Birds and at DiBiase LOE. The Eagles right now 12-1 on top of the NFL, the NFC East. They are the best team in football, and they're gearing up for another road game against the Chicago Bears this Sunday at 1 o'clock at Soldier Field. Going to be the first time they're at Soldier Field since the double doink game back in 2018 in the wild card round of the playoffs. The Bears have an exciting young quarterback in Justin Fields, but their roster is one of the worst in the NFL. So the Eagles are a heavy favorite. They have that game against the Dallas Cowboys next week on Christmas Eve. So can't overlook this matchup. Got to take care of business, as Jalen Hurts and Jordan Mailata said this week when Micah Parsons was talking smack already. So got to make sure they take care of business here. And I think it's a very lopsided affair when it comes to the combination of talent between Philadelphia and Chicago. Got some questions from our listeners on this mailbag edition of the show about that matchup. Also going to get into our 3-player props that we're riding with in Eagles Bears, including this week's head-to-head. I'm on fire right now with my head-to-head matchups. Last week I won Jack Stahl over Daniel Bellinger. The week before it was Quez Watkins over Nick Akane's Westbrook in Tennessee, or Westbrook Akane. I'll never get that name right, the Titans' third receiver, but I'm 2-0 in the last 2 weeks with my head-to-head player matchup. So we'll get into those bets presented by BetOnline later on in the podcast. But like I said, it's been a while since we've done a mailbag on the podcast, and in the best Eagles season we've seen since the Super Bowl 5 years ago in 2017. I wanted to hear more from you, the listeners. Where is your head at right now at 12-1? What thoughts do you have? What are your biggest questions? And honestly, I love the questions you guys asked. A lot of different ones about the path to the Super Bowl, some draft talk, again, questions about what they're going to do at safety these next few weeks. So we're going to get into that mailbag right now. And I want to start with that question I mentioned about the path to the Super Bowl. This comes from on Twitter at HEagles10, who tweets in, "Hey Lou, most likely Super Bowl path for the Eagles that you think is realistic, and what would you want it to be?" So he's asking, what do I predict will be the path for the Eagles? Let's assume they get the bye week as the 1 seed in the NFC. What 3 opponents do we think they're going to have if they get all the way to the Super Bowl in the NFC divisional round, the NFC Championship game, and the Super Bowl? And then what would I want that path to be based on like the ease of that path and maybe storylines as well? I think it's a great question, and I've thought about it a lot over the last few weeks because the Eagles clinched the playoffs last week, the first team to do it until San Francisco did it on Thursday Night Football, but they already got the playoffs locked up. They're 2 games up for the lead in the NFC East. They're a couple games up still in the lead for that 1 seed in the NFC. So what do you start to look ahead to now? It's, okay, they have cemented themselves as the best team in football. We're thinking Super Bowl now, not a fun playoff run like in 2021 that came out of nowhere, not a race for the division like 2019, not even a race for really anything right now. It's how do we win the big one? That is what they have set their sights on. They have raised the bar to where that is the expectation now. If the Eagles do not come home this year with the Lombardi Trophy, a lot of people are going to think it was a disappointing season. So what is that path? To be honest right now, like if I were to predict the NFC playoffs, here is how I think it would go. Let's assume, again, the Eagles are the 1 seed. They hold off Minnesota and Dallas this final month of the year. Let's just say the standings are what they are, and it doesn't change. Obviously, it could in the NFL, but let's say it doesn't. The Minnesota Vikings would play the New York Giants right now, the 2 versus the 7. The 3 seed San Francisco 49ers would take on the 6-seeded Washington Commanders, and then the 4-5 matchup would be the Tampa Bay Buccaneers hosting the Dallas Cowboys. So Vikings, Giants, Niners, Commanders, Cowboys, Buccaneers. if I had to predict who wins those 3 games right now if the season ended today, I'd say Minnesota beats the Giants. I'd say the 49ers beat the Commanders, and then the Cowboys beat the Buccaneers. So the 2 seed wins, the 3 seed wins, and the 5 seed wins. So the Eagles, of course, as the 1 seed, automatically host the lowest seed that survives to the next round. That would be the Dallas Cowboys. It would be Eagles, Cowboys, and again, this is my predictive part of the question. It would be Eagles, Cowboys, and then I think since the Vikings and Niners would win, it'd be the 2 versus the 3. It'd be Minnesota hosting San Francisco. Let's assume the Eagles beat Dallas, right? Because this is the path to the Super Bowl. You got to beat the Cowboys at Lincoln Financial Field. Who do they play in the NFC Championship game at the Link? I think between the Niners and the Vikings, even with Brock Purdy in a quarterback right now, the 49ers are a unit. They are just, I think, too talented on both sides of the ball. Very similar to Philadelphia. They just don't really have the MVP. They don't have close to an MVP quarterback. Brock Purdy's been good, and I think just good enough to where he can beat the Minnesota Vikings on the road. So I would say they have to beat Dallas, then San Francisco in the NFC Championship game, and then, I don't know, you got to beat one of these juggernaut quarterbacks in the AFC to win a championship. You got to beat Josh Allen, or you got to beat Patrick Mahomes, or you got to beat Joe Burrow, or if he comes back in time and gets on a run, you got to beat Lamar Jackson, one of those 4 former MVPs or, MVP candidates that have also been to a Super Bowl, right? Mahomes and Burrow have been to a Super Bowl. Mahomes and Lamar have won MVPs. Allen's been a top-tier candidate, as is Burrow and Mahomes this year. So you got to beat one of the best quarterbacks, one of the best young quarterbacks in football to win a championship. So I would say, and it's a great question. Thanks so much for that question. I say that's the most likely Super Bowl path is the Dallas Cowboys, the San Francisco 49ers, and then Mahomes, Allen, Lamar, or Burrow to win it all. If I had to predict right now how it would go with the standings are the way out they are, that's how I would lay it out. Now, what do I want? And that's the second part of the question. What would I want the path to be for the Eagles if they are the 1 seed? I mean, as a storyline and as a journalist, as a guy that wants to create content every day for you, the Eagles Cowboys first matchup in the playoffs for the Birds, divisional round at the Link, as the 1 seed, the best team in football, and the first game you host is against Dallas. I mean, the journalist in me, although Dallas is a really good team, and, based on ease, you would want Brady to upset Dallas, but man, the journalist in me would love to see the atmosphere at the Link between the Eagles and the Cowboys in the playoffs with you as the 1 seed. I would love to, that would give me NFC title vibes of 2017 Eagles Vikings. So, but of course, you want to have the best chance to go to the Super Bowl. And I'd rather play, although it is Tom Brady, and I'm scared of Brady even still at 6-7, you keep seeing him rip off these crazy 4th quarter comebacks. If the game's close, I'll always be nervous of Brady, but ideally you'd rather host Tampa Bay, I think, with the way they're playing over Dallas. So you would want, based on the ease of the path, you would want Brady to beat Dallas, and you would want either the Giants or Commanders to get an upset over Minnesota or San Francisco, which is totally possible. And I have to correct myself there, because if the Commanders or Giants were to get an upset, they would go to Philadelphia. So that's the ideal matchup, is to have the Giants or Commanders to find a way to upset Kirk Cousins or Brock Purdy. Is that impossible? No. I mean, are the Vikings and Niners very talented outside of quarterback and going to be a heavy favorite in those games? For sure. But I could see the Giants or Commanders playing spoiler. So you would want one of those matchups, and you'd want Brady to take out Dallas. And then in that NFC title game, you'd, hope you can get like a Tampa Bay or, Minnesota. I don't want Dallas or San Francisco right now out of all of the teams. So that's what I would say based on the ease of the path, but also what I think is the most realistic. Awesome question. Thank you so much. It's been in my head for a while now, so I'm glad we got to talk about it on the show. Got more questions, though, on today's edition of Locked On Eagles from you, the listeners. It's a mailbag edition of the show. And guys, today's episode of Locked On Eagles is brought to you by Tommy John's. Don't make your loved ones face the dead of winter in old t-shirts, ancient underwear, and ratty sweats. Help them fight cold with Cozy. Give the gift of Tommy John. In Tommy John, you're that much more comfortable, so you can do everything better. Shop Tommy John's Wrap It Up sale right now and give the gift of comfort to everybody on your list, including yourself. There's no shame in shopping for yourself this holiday season. Treat yourself with new Tommy John underwear, loungewear, and pajamas. With over 18 million pairs sold, Give Tommy John's has become a holiday tradition. giving, I should say. 90% of women and men love giving a gift and getting a gift from Tommy John. That's why Tommy John's doesn't have customers. They have fanatics. Celebrate softness season with the gift of new Tommy John's underwear, loungewear, and pajamas. Every gift's backed by Tommy John's best pair you'll ever wear, or it's free guarantee. Hurry to Tommy John's Wrap It Up sale and get 30% off everything, plus free shipping at TommyJohn.com/lockedon. Order now so your gifts arrive before the holidays, 30% off, plus free shipping at TommyJohn.com/lockedon. That's TommyJohn.com/lockedon. See site for details. I'm Louie DiBiase. Thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Guys, make sure your second listen is the Locked On Sports Today podcast, from the games that matter the most to the biggest stories in sports. Go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with local experts and insight only Locked On can provide. Locked On Sports Today, available on this app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. Today is a mailbag edition of Locked On Eagles. Some awesome questions from @HEagles10 on Twitter for segment 1 about the most likely Super Bowl path for the Birds, and also what we would want that path to look like based on the ease of the matchups. I want to get into some more questions now, though, that have to do with some different topics here. And Ricky tweets in, what kind of safety rotation do you think the Eagles use on Sunday against the Chicago Bears? Obviously, we know Chauncey Gardner-Johnson still on injured reserve with that kidney injury, a lacerated kidney, and Reed Blankenship now is also injured. He avoided IR, though. He got injured in that previous game against the Tennessee Titans. So, or was it the Giants? Am I totally blanking? Yeah, it was against New York. He got hurt in that matchup against the Giants at MetLife. Yes, the Meadowlands. And so right now the Eagles are left with Kevon Wallace. They just signed Anthony Harris, and they have, Josiah Scott still, with, of course, Marcus Epps healthy. So Ricky tweets in, what kind of safety rotation should we expect against Chicago? I think you should mostly expect Kevon Wallace to play. Even with Anthony Harris signed, Harris was a 16-game starter in 2021, but we know Harris is not an impact player at this point. And Kevon Wallace, I think he's made some plays this year. I think he's made some important plays in a spot play here and there against Green Bay. He made a nice breakup in the end zone, made a good play against Houston as well in deep coverage, saved a deep touchdown. So Wallace actually the summer too, I thought looked okay in the preseason. So I think Wallace is the move to play. And again, especially I'm not really worried about safety this week. You have Darius Slay and James Bradbury, of course, which makes you feel better. And the Chicago Bears are at receiver. I mean, who are you scared of to beat you deep over these safeties? And Slay and Bradbury, Chase Claypool, Equinemius St. Brown, Velus Jones Jr. Without Darnell Mooney out there for Chicago, there's not a single receiver that really scares you to beat you deep. So this is a good week to not really have great safeties outside of Marcus Epps, because Chicago does not really pose a threat when it comes to the deep ball. Although Justin Fields has the arm strength, he really doesn't have the weapons, and he's going up against the best cornerback duo in the NFL. And Marcus Epps is still there. I think they're going to be fine. It's going to be Kevon Wallace. I could also see them, though, using a little more Josiah Scott and some nickel packages. You saw that a few times against the Giants, where Avonte Maddox goes back to his traditional starting role as a slot corner. Josiah Scott moves from the slot. He's on the sidelines most of the game, but there was some times where the Eagles used him in a dime look, where Maddox is in the slot and Scott's kind of a hybrid safety player. So I think you could also see some Josiah Scott as well. I think Wallace and Scott will definitely play over Anthony Harris. But like I said, Ricky, they're going to be fine this week at safety. Reed Blankenship avoided IR, so hopefully you can get him back within a few weeks, and hopefully Chauncey Gardner-Johnson's ready, right before the playoffs for sure. So you can get CGJ back, and Dallas Goedert's coming back soon as well. Avonte Maddox already returned. So did Jordan Davis. The Eagles are getting close to full health at the perfect time. But really great question, Ricky. Thanks so much for tuning into the show and, of course, always contributing. Let's get to a question. It's a joint question because it was kind of the same thing from @KingGoldschmidt and @GrumpyWarrior. I wish I knew your names. I get so many of these mailbag questions, and the Twitter accounts are always @KingGoldschmidt and @GrumpyWarrior. But nonetheless, guys, great questions. Not really about the 2022 regular season, but I'm always down to talk NFL draft right here on Locked On Eagles. Both these guys ask what you would do right now with the Eagles' 2 first-round draft picks, specifically the one that you own from the New Orleans Saints, which is 4th overall currently, which I still cannot believe that they have that pick. The fact that the Saints thought they were a wide receiver in Chris Olave away from being a title contender is hilarious. And Chris Olave has been a great player for them. I mean, he's going to be a favorite to win Rookie of the Year, but they don't have a quarterback. 4th overall, they'd have a chance at, Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, Will Levis. This is one of the all-time screw-ups by New Orleans. I mean, they've done it multiple times. 2018, they trade up and traded future first, and you think it's for Lamar Jackson. It should have been, but it wasn't. It was for Marcus Davenport, and they did it again, and it might cost them a quarterback. I still can't believe Howie Roseman pulled that off, and the coolest thing is the literal best scenario played out. Jalen Hurts became the guy. Obviously, we knew how he made this trade because he wanted the flexibility of, if Jalen Hurts isn't the quarterback this year, I have 2 first-round picks and a stronger quarterback class. I can go get my guy. Well, that worked because you have a top 5 pick. So if Jalen did not turn out, you're in prime position to go try again. But Jalen Hurts did become the guy. He's going to win MVP likely this year or be a top 2 candidate. And you have a top 5 pick that you can use at another position. So Howie Roseman's quarterback plan worked literally perfectly. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. And meanwhile, New Orleans is going to be scrambling this offseason. But anyway, I digress. Back to the actual question. What would the Eagles do with that pick and their other pick, which right now would be 32nd overall and 31st because Miami forfeited their pick. Let's hope it stays in that spot. I would say, obviously, with that 4th pick, you hope that the top 3 picks, at least 2 of them are quarterbacks. And then if the Saints can hold on to this position, and it's scary because they're only 2 games back at 4-8 from the division lead. But let's hope the other 3 teams get ahead of New Orleans and they hang on to a top 5, maybe this 4th overall pick. Give me run to the podium and take Will Anderson, the edge rusher from Alabama, or the interior defensive lineman from Georgia, Jalen Carter, and reunite him with Jordan Davis. I mean, it would be incredible to land an elite defensive lineman like that in the draft, considering you already have the deepest defensive line in football. You have 5 players on this Eagles defensive line with at least 6 sacks. That's never happened before in franchise history. Also, this could be the first time ever in NFL history that 4 players on the same team have at least 10 sacks. Hassan Reddick already has 10. Brandon Graham is 8.5. And you still got 4 games left, remember. Javon Hargrave is 8. And Josh Sweat has 7.5. I mean, and you're going to add to that unit potentially Will Anderson or Jalen Carter. Just insane. Plus, Javon Hargrave is a free agent. So is Fletcher Cox. So is Brandon Graham and Linval Joseph and Ndamukong Suh. So I think, guys, that would be the move right now is a defensive lineman for the future. They're probably going to bring back 2 to 4 of those free agents I mentioned, but Howie Roseman wants to be 5-6 deep pretty much at each spot when it comes to the trenches on the defensive line because they love to rotate guys. And I would prefer Will Anderson over Carter because I think you already have Jordan Davis, Milton Williams, and Marlon Tuipulotu under contract. I think you're going to re-sign Hargrave and or Cox, and maybe Linval Joseph too. So you're going to have a lot of defensive tackle depth. I would love Will Anderson because even if you have Reddick, Sweat, and Graham under contract next year, you like to run 4 defensive linemen on the edge. Will Anderson with Hassan Reddick and Josh Sweat and BG. Oh my gosh. I mean, just a complete luxury that most NFL teams could only dream of. So I would definitely say edge or defensive tackle, even if you can't get to Carter or Anderson, let's say you drop a little bit because the Saints win a game or 2. Miles Murphy from Clemson, love him on the edge. Brian Breezy also on the inside at Clemson. I think the Eagles are going to really look at defensive line. If not, Lane Johnson's getting up there in age. He said he maybe only wants to play a few more years. Andre Dillard's going to leave in free agency to be a starter somewhere next year. You're going to need tackle depth and potentially an heir to Lane eventually. Peter Skoronski from Northwestern. Maybe you take early on or with that 31st overall pick. I would say if you don't take a defensive lineman, watch for offensive tackle or cornerback. Cornerback with Darius Slay in his 30s. James Bradbury, a free agent and pushing 30, likely to leave for a big deal next year. You need cornerback depth. You need a long-term CB1 or CB2. So I'd say defensive line, offensive line, duh, it's the Eagles. And then I would say cornerback for sure. So yeah, some draft talk on Locked On Eagles during a 12-1 run. That's how you know Eagles fans are diehards, though, because they think about everything and they love consuming any kind of content they can get. Even in a 12-1 run, they're like, tell me about the Northwestern right tackle. I mean, I love Eagles fans for sure. Thanks, guys, for the questions. Coming up next, though, on Locked On Eagles, it's LOE3 presented by Bet Online. My 3-player props that I'm riding with for Eagles Bears. That's coming up right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. And guys, today's show is sponsored by Total Wine and More. This holiday season, find what you love at Total Wine and More. With so many great bottles to choose from, I'm popping open a bottle of Riesling tonight from Total Wine and More. It's easy to find a new favorite, Cabernet or Chardonnay. I also have a bottle of Chardonnay as well for the game. I was a beer guy, but Total Wine and More got me into wine. Perfect gifts for everybody on your list with some help from a friendly guide. I'm Italian. I got to get into wine, right? It's in my blood. And all with the confidence, by the way, of knowing you found something special for the lowest price. Love what you find only at Total Wine and More. Curbside pickup and delivery available in most areas. Visit TotalWine.com to learn more. Drink responsibly, be 21. I'm Louie DiBiase. This is Locked On Eagles. Thanks so much for tuning in to this Friday edition of the show. We've got Eagles Bears on Sunday at 1 o'clock. The Eagles are a 9-point favorite right now, according to the official sports book of the Locked On Podcast Network. It is Bet Online. And Bet Online is bringing you today's LOE 3. Me and Gino have been on fire lately with these 3-player props we each bet. So we have 6 bets for you to ride with every Sunday or whenever the Eagles play. We're on fire right now. We would win you a ton of money this year if you would have bet with us with every pick. So I'm going to try to keep that hot streak going. I'm trying to carry us. Gino, he's struggling a little more. He's been hitting on some big bets, though, when it comes to odds. So although he's under 500 this year, he's hit on some big ones that were like plus 350, 500. He's been winning you some money as well. So here are my 3 bets. Number 1, I'm riding with a plus 38 bet here of Jalen Hurts having at least 57 rushing yards and Justin Fields having under 71 rushing yards. So this is bold. Again, plus 328. Justin Fields leads the NFL this year in rushing for all quarterbacks. Over 900 yards on the ground this year. 8 rushing touchdowns. He hasn't had a game in the last 5 weeks where he was under that line of 71 rushing yards. He had exactly 71 last week. It's probably where BetOnline got this from. But I'm going to go bold. I'm going to say in the battle of the mobile quarterbacks, Jalen Hurts shows up Justin Fields and shows him how it's done. Jalen Hurts hit the over on 57 rushing yards. Justin Fields the under on 71. I thought the Eagles, the last time they played a really mobile quarterback, had a great game plan. At least early on, it was against the Arizona Cardinals and Kyler Murray. Kazir White was a quarterback spy. Hassan Reddick was all over him as well. The Eagles have a deep and fresh defensive line. I think they're going to keep Fields in check. They know if you keep him inside the pocket with a very not talented offensive line and not really any weapons to go to, they're gonna win this game. So keeping Justin Fields from carrying that offense by running is going to be the central focus of this defense. And so is he still going to get probably like 50 to 65 rushing yards? I'll say, yeah, maybe even a rushing touchdown, but I don't think he gets 71 plus. So I'm going to hammer those odds. I like plus 328. Jalen Hurts, at least 57 rushing yards. Justin Fields, the under on 71. So there's my first bet for you to ride with. Number 2, it's a defensive bet. I'm 1 for 1 in defensive bets this year. I've only done it once. It was last week. I said Hassan Reddick was going to get at least a half sack. He finished with a sack on the day. Here's my second defensive bet of the season. Darius Slay is going to have over 3.5 tackles. That's plus 112, plus 112 odds here. And it's kind of the same logic as my first bet. I think Justin Fields is going to try to get outside the pocket a lot. It's going to be key. Obviously, Kazir White's going to chase him down. TJ Edwards is going to have his eye on him. You know, the defensive line is deep and fresh. As I mentioned, they're going to be focused on keeping him inside the numbers. But Justin Fields is Justin Fields. He's elite in this way. You can only really hope to contain him to a certain degree. It's going to be crucial that cornerbacks, safeties, they get to the boundary and get this guy down in the open field. Darius Slay is going to be a key component to that game plan. I'm going to say Darius Slay has over 3.5 tackles plus 112 odds here. All right, so those are 2 of my 3 bets for LOE3 this week presented by BetOnline. And my following bet is this week's head-to-head matchup, and it is between my guy, Quez Watkins, and Chicago Bears tight end Cole Kmet. I'm riding with Quez Watkins to have more receiving yards than Cole Kmet. This is bold, for sure. Kmet is the Bears' number 1 passing target. He's Justin Fields' number 1 option, his security blanket over the middle. If he's getting rushed a lot and he's getting kept inside the pocket, like I mentioned, he's going to have to get it out to Kmet. So this is bold, but the Bears do not have pretty much any talent on the defensive side of the football. Jalen Hurts has the most 25-plus yard touchdowns this year of anybody in the NFL. And I want to confirm, but I saw an insane stat from Jeff Kerr of CBS Sports, our good friend, about Hurts' aggressiveness downfield this year. Yeah, here it is. Jalen Hurts has 10 touchdown passes this year that traveled for 25-plus air yards. So not only is that the most in the league this year, only Drew Brees has more in a season. Since air yards were first tracked in 2006, he had 14 in that season. So Jalen Hurts has been the best deep ball thrower when it comes to throwing touchdowns of anybody outside of Drew Brees in the last decade and a half. And Quez Watkins is a burner. He didn't get in on the action last week. It was Devontae Smith and it was A.J. Brown. But I think Quez Watkins gets his this week. And I think because it doesn't have to come with like 6 to 7 catches. Last week he had a rare game where he had like 5 receptions, but under 40 yards. I mean, that's rare for Quez. It's normally the opposite. Even if he gets like 2 or 3 catches this week, I think one's going to go for a big gain, maybe a touchdown. You know, still another week without Dallas Goedert. He's still your third primary passing target. I'm 3 for 3 in my last 3 Quez Watkins bets. I was 0 for 5 to start the year, but I'm 3 for 3 lately. So I'm going to try to keep riding that hot streak and go off the back of number 16. So my final bet is the head-to-head Quez Watkins versus Bears tight end Cole Kmet. I say Watkins finishes the game with more receiving yards. Again, you can make all of those bets at the official sports book of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's Bet Online where the game starts. That's going to do it for today's edition of Locked On Eagles, guys. Thanks so much for tuning into the show. You can find us Monday through Friday on all podcast platforms and on YouTube as well. I'll be talking about the game, during the game, before and after on Twitter at Locked On Birds and at DBLC LOE. Once again, thanks for making Locked On Eagles your first listen today and every day. Make sure your second listen is the Locked On Sports Today podcast. The biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day. As always, thank you for downloading. Thank you for watching and listening, and let's go Birds.